That was the sound of the first piece included on the soundtrack for Koei no Katachi. Its use of feedback, of stuttering instrumentation, of bright popping sounds cropped atop the cyclical rhythm of the repetitious piano perfectly embodies the tone and feelings the film wishes to adopt and puts on display. However, while I consider the soundtrack's use within the movie to be extremely interesting, that is not what I'm going to be looking at today. If you were looking for a video of that sort, I have a couple great ones in the description for you to look at. Instead, today we'll be looking at the soundtrack itself, at its construction and its tone, and at its successes in connecting with its audience, or, well, at least with me. So sit back, relax, and let's explore the world of Koei no Katachi's soundtrack, A Shape of Light. If I had to use one word to describe the first disc of this soundtrack, it would be minimalistic. If I had to choose a second word, it would be emotional. Now, both of those words are fairly broad, and lend themselves to a variety of interpretations, just as much of language does. At the least, these terms are vague, but they leave an impression of some sort, and you probably have some idea of what I mean and what to expect based on those terms. The actual pieces included in the soundtrack are similarly vague, and similarly focused on leaving an impression. Much of the soundtrack concerns itself with creating images, with creating a soft sensation that makes the listener want to close their eyes, tilt their head back, and just let the music wash over them to let the sounds inform their other senses. In one of my favorite pieces on this soundtrack, titled VAN, this is incredibly apparent and incredibly powerful. As with much of the soundtrack, you can hear sounds that are normally removed from recordings, like the sound of the piano's keys clacking down or the pedals pushing. In some ways, this method of recording has also led to many of the tracks feeling empty, which perfectly illustrates a sense of longing and of distance. The crackling of the mic gives the recording a natural, underproduced, and charmingly amateurish feel, although this is a very calculated decision, just with wonderful execution. You might have also noticed that the title of that track, VAN, is a bit odd. I don't say van because I don't think that's what it's supposed to be. It doesn't hold any particular meaning, at least not to me, and none of the other tracks' titles on the first disc do much to change this. In some specific cases, they are denoting a complete word, I think, like FLC becoming firework, a piece which explodes as it swells and increases in intensity, parts layering on top of one another into a climactic crescendo of explosive emotion that just sounds like a firework. Now, to move away from the vague side of things a bit, let's discuss the components of this soundtrack. I split the soundtrack into 3 components. First, the piano. Second, the electronic elements. And third, the mallets. I call these things components because they are each used for sometimes different and sometimes similar goals, and they are combined and left alone at various moments to create different feelings and different textures and different impressions. First, the piano is used to evoke a sense of nostalgia, that sense of being separated from something you love and wanting it back, but looking back with hope and some sense of happiness all the same. The piano is a fantastic instrument for carrying these feelings, with its soft tones and the ability to hold the pedal down and let each note swell into the next, to let the sounds combine into one massive wave of tones descending upon the listener's ear. Second, there's how the electronic aspects of the soundtrack are used. On one hand, these sounds are used to also give the sense of a wave of sound, just like the piano sometimes is. On the other hand, they are also used to give a sense of unease and tension to the soundtrack. Certainly, sometimes the electronic segments are relaxing enough that I wanted to close my eyes and just get lulled to sleep by them. But other times they are full of anxiety. In fact, sometimes these feelings are tied together. But this isn't a ballistic anxiety or an extravagant anxiety. It's a soft-spoken, understated one. The electronic elements achieve this both through their fuzzy tone, with that sparkly uncertainty giving way to some semblance of the unknown, and through the way motifs are constantly repeated and how these motifs wash over the more melodic elements of the soundtrack. Third, there are the mallet instruments and how those are used. These, like the piano, are used to evoke a sense of nostalgia, less through their tone, however, and more through their symbolic meaning. At least for me, mallet instruments are always inherently linked to my childhood and specifically to elementary school. My favorite classes from those times, and Some of the classes I tend to look most fondly back on because of that were those when the music teacher would say that we could use the mallet instruments and hammer away on our miniature xylophones and marimbas. Because of this memory, the bright tone of the xylophone, the soft and dark breath of the marimba, and the bright and stretched sounds of the vibraphone all manage to touch the same feelings I have, and can be used to enhance the textures of many of the pieces without taking away from their nostalgic impact. When all three of these elements collide together, there are these explosions of feeling that are just so powerful and so beautiful and so gripping. However, to say that the soundtrack only consists of these instruments or these feelings or these components would be a drastic overstatement and an unfortunate overgeneralization. The track titled SLT is one of my favorites on the soundtrack, partially due to the way it contrasts with most of the other pieces. After all, when so much of the soundtrack is soft and restrained, these moments of differing, more staccato instrumentation are all the more powerful due to their contrasting intonation. The second disc of this soundtrack is quite a bit different from the first, containing mostly pieces that I don't recall appearing in the film. In fact, I'm not sure if any of them did. Some of these are redos or remixes of songs that we heard in the first disc, and they're equally interesting and equally powerful. The first difference to note, though, is that these tracks have more specific titles, which leads to a far less general feeling. In some cases, we are given some ideas of the images we may be led to with these names, those of nightlights and sparkles, for example. The other difference is that there are some truly unexpected tracks here with wildly different instrumentation, or at least uses of the instrumentation. The one that most clearly pops into my mind is Laser, which comes out of absolutely nowhere with its heavy drums and this weird electronic voice spelling out laser over and over again. And because of how unexpected it was, it's one of my favorite tracks on this entire thing. Moments like these, those moments of drastic difference and of startling contrast, brought a huge smile to my face, and bring a smile to my face again if I listen to them again. And that's really why I love this soundtrack. Because it makes me smile, because it makes me laugh, because it makes me think of nearly forgotten memories and of old anxieties. This may not be a soundtrack I'll listen to frequently, but there are a number of tracks I will be sure to go back to if I need to relax or if I just want to feel something very personal and very beautiful. Provided for you here is a list of my favorite tracks from this soundtrack. A list that could change with future listenings, but should suffice for now to give you a bit of everything that the soundtrack has to offer. One of my only complaints about the soundtrack is actually that it can repeat itself a bit too much, which makes sense as that repetition gives way to the idea of just running through a thought again and again and again. But because of that, some of the tracks can be very samey, and honestly, listening through this whole thing, it can get kind of stale. So I would recommend that if you had checked out the soundtrack before and you just found yourself bored with it, to maybe just look up some of these specific pieces and roll with those. And if you've already listened to the soundtrack, or in this case, if you listen to it and want some more similar stuff after you enjoy it, hopefully, I recommend Philip Glass's Glassworks, Explosion in the Skies, The Earth is Not a Cold Dead Place, Radiohead's Kid A, and the works of Lama, another project by Kensuke Ushio, who also made the soundtrack. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope that you enjoyed it. This is a series I plan to do from now on, going over my favorite soundtracks in this sort of fashion. I'm planning to do votes on some of the future episodes over on my Twitter, so as always, I look forward to hearing from you, and I wish you all the best, and I hope that you have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.